Welcome back to True Echo, where we bring you the stories they tried to silence, stories of struggle, heart, and transformation that speak truth to power. Today's story is one you'll never forget. It starts with a teenage girl told she wasn't good enough, and ends with a single note that silenced the room and changed everything. Now, let's begin. No, Lena, you're not playing tonight. 6 words. That's all it took to shatter the dream she'd built in the silence of her bedroom, the long nights at the school practice room, and in the quiet encouragement of her grandmother. Lena Morrison stood backstage, staring at Mr. Kessler as the words settled into her like cold rain. Her fingers had just been inches from adjusting the fabric of her carefully ironed dress. Now, they dropped to her sides, useless. Her breath hitched. She wasn't sure if she was going to faint or fight, but Kessler had already turned his attention to someone else. You're too emotional. Sloppy. We need consistency, not drama, he said, flipping through his clipboard. I don't understand, she whispered, but her voice barely reached him. He didn't care. He had already moved on to the golden girl of the department, Erica Simmons. Blonde, tall, expressionless, everything Lena wasn't. I can play it, Erica offered, voice cold and sharp. Kessler nodded. Good. Let's keep the program tight. We don't have time for fragile egos. Fragile? She had bled for this moment. Practiced until her fingers ached. Lena had sat alone for hours learning every inflection of the piece, how it rose like breath and fell like longing. But now it would belong to someone else. She watched as Erica adjusted her gown and stepped confidently toward the stage. Lena drifted to the shadows of the wings, her spotlight stolen. She sat on a black equipment case, the cold metal pressing into her legs as the notes of her piece, began to echo from the grand piano just beyond the curtain. Erica's version was technically correct. But it had no soul. And no one would know the difference. Except one person. In the third row sat Ruth Morrison, Lena's grandmother, the woman who'd raised her after her mother disappeared. Ruth had watched Lena grow from a silent, wide-eyed girl into a musician who could whisper grief and hope through a melody. Ruth didn't applaud when Erica finished. She didn't even move. Her eyes never left the side of the stage where Lena sat, forgotten. Backstage, a voice crackled through the headset of a young tech assistant. Final performers out. Food poisoning. We've got a 10-minute gap to fill. Any backup? The assistant looked around, panicked. Then spotted Lena. He rushed over, kneeling in front of her. Hey, I know this is crazy, but I heard you play last week. After rehearsal. It was, honestly, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. We need someone to fill in. It should be you. Lena blinked at him, stunned. Kessler said I wasn't ready. He shook his head. He's not the audience. A minute later, the event coordinator approached Kessler. We need someone to fill the final slot. She's the only one left. No, Kessler snapped. Absolutely not. She's not reliable. But he didn't realize the nearby mic had picked up every word. The audience heard him. And they didn't agree. Let her play, someone shouted. Then another. And another. The clapping started in pockets, then spread like wildfire. Let her play. Let her play. Lena's heart slammed against her ribs. For the first time in her life, the crowd was asking for her, not by name, but by truth. She stepped forward slowly, trembling. Kessler's jaw locked, but he didn't stop her. He couldn't. She walked toward the grand piano as the crowd settled into a stunned hush. Lena didn't feel her feet hit the floor. She only felt the pressure of silence and the weight of being seen. She sat down. And she remembered. She was 6 again, playing Clair de Lune on a broken keyboard. Ruth had stood in the doorway, silent tears in her eyes. She wasn't playing for applause now. She was playing for her life. The first note was shaky. Barely there. It hung in the air like a breath she was afraid to take. But the second note came stronger, and the third stronger still. Lena didn't play the piece she'd rehearsed endlessly, the one Erica had stolen under Kessler's command. No, she played something else. Something older. A lullaby. The melody her mother used to hum while folding laundry, while cooking ramen in the middle of the night, back when things still made sense. Lena hadn't touched this tune in years, but now it returned like an old friend with gentle hands. She let it guide her. The auditorium, once full of polite clapping and bored glances, became silent. Eerily, reverently silent. She didn't need to announce herself. Every note was an introduction. Every phrase, a page from a book only she could write. This wasn't perfection. It wasn't even performance. It was confession. Backstage, Kessler stood with his arms folded, expression unreadable. His face was flushed, jaw tight. He was used to being the center of power. The man in charge. But now the auditorium, the world, had turned. And he couldn't stop it. Erica, still flushed from her own performance, stood nearby with her arms crossed tightly. She said nothing, but her eyes flicked toward the stage, where Lena now seemed to glow under the lights. The melody swelled gently, like an ocean rising without rage, only inevitability. And then it stopped. The last note lingered, trembling faintly beneath her fingertips. No one moved. The silence that followed was sacred, not stunned. Lena looked up, unsure whether she had done something wrong. Then, slowly, someone rose to their feet. Then another. Then another. The applause wasn't wild, it was real. It built like a storm of warmth. Thunderous not in volume, but in purpose. They weren't just clapping for what she played. They were clapping because she had spoken. And they had heard. Lena sat frozen at the piano, hands still over the keys, heart pounding like a second instrument. Then she stood and gave a shaky bow. Somewhere in the middle of the crowd, Ruth stood too. Her hands didn't clap. They stayed folded over her chest as tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She nodded once. A deep, solid nod that said everything, I see you. I always have. Backstage, the event organizer rushed toward Lena as she stepped into the wings. That was, she tried to find the words. You moved them. You changed something tonight. I wasn't even supposed to play, Lena whispered. The organizer glanced over Lena's shoulder toward Kessler, who stood stiff and pale, clipboard hanging limply at his side. Well, the woman said quietly, maybe the best things happen when people stop listening to the wrong voices. Lena nodded, swallowing hard. She looked down at her hands, these same hands Kessler had dismissed as too emotional. For the first time, she saw them for what they were, powerful. Her fellow students began to gather around. Students who had never looked twice at her now reached out to touch her shoulder, offer quiet congratulations. Some looked at her with admiration, others with awe. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't the forgotten girl in the wings. Erica stood alone, eyes unreadable, arms still folded. She didn't speak. Just stared. And Kessler? He said nothing at all. Not, good job. Not, you proved me wrong. Just silence. But Lena didn't shrink from that silence. She owned it. That night, as the auditorium emptied and the echoes of applause faded, Lena and Ruth sat on the cold stone steps out front. I didn't think I could do it, Lena said softly. Ruth reached into her bag and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. She handed it to Lena. The edges were yellowed with age. It was a photo of a much younger Ruth Morrison, smiling beside an upright piano. I used to teach music, she said. I turned down a place in the state orchestra because one of my students needed me more. I didn't tell you because, this had to be your journey. Not mine. Lena blinked, staring at the image. Did Mom know? She did. She could have been brilliant, too. But she got lost before she found her sound. And me? You found yours. And the world heard it. Lena held the clipping to her chest. A beginning had opened. And something told her, this was just the first chapter. The next morning, Lena woke up to the buzz of her phone vibrating against her nightstand. It wasn't just one notification, it was dozens. Then hundreds. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and sat up, blinking at the screen. Someone had posted a video of her performance the night before. It had been shot from a shaky phone in the third row, but the audio was clear enough to hear every trembling note. The caption read, "She wasn't even on the program, and yet she left us in tears." By the time Lena finished brushing her teeth, the video had over 30,000 views. By lunch, it had reached 500,000. People from all over the world were sharing it, musicians, teachers, influencers. Comments poured in like a river of kindness. I felt every note. She plays like she's lived through storms. This is what real music sounds like. One message stood out above the rest. It was from a director at a prestigious summer arts conservatory in Vermont. Subject, Invitation to Vermont School of the Arts, full scholarship. Lena stared at the screen, blinking in disbelief. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a lifeline. A place that saw her not as a student who had been overlooked, but as a voice worth cultivating. She ran downstairs with the email still glowing on her screen. Ruth was already at the kitchen table, sipping her morning tea and reading a dog-eared paperback. Lena placed the phone in front of her. Look. Ruth adjusted her glasses and scanned the message. Her face didn't change at first. But then she looked up, eyes shining. They saw you, she said softly. They really saw you. Lena nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Meanwhile, at school, Kessler was losing control. The school board had begun receiving emails and phone calls from concerned parents. Former students started coming forward, some sharing their own stories of being silenced, humiliated, discouraged. One student said she quit piano for 2 years because Kessler once told her she smiled too much while playing. Another remembered being punished for adding vibrato to a classical piece, because it wasn't true to the composer's intentions. The music department called an emergency meeting. Rumors swirled that Kessler had been placed on administrative leave. But Lena didn't care about the rumors anymore. She didn't need to see him punished. She didn't even need an apology. She had found something better. She had found herself. That afternoon, Lena walked into the school music room to collect her things. The place was eerily quiet without Kessler's constant pacing and commands. She moved carefully through the room, collecting her music sheets and notebooks. A woman stood at the front of the room, speaking quietly with another teacher. She turned. Lena Morrison. Lena nodded, surprised. Yes. I'm Miss Hart. I've been asked to step in as interim music director. Lena stiffened, unsure what was coming next. But Miss Hart smiled. Not kindly. Not pitifully. Just, genuinely. I saw your performance, she said. Online. Twice. And I read about the Vermont offer. Congratulations. Thank you, Lena said, unsure what else to say. Miss Hart walked over and stood beside the piano. I'd like you to consider something. What? Teaching. Not full-time, obviously. But mentoring. You have something our students need, not just talent. You remind people why music matters. Lena blinked. I'm not qualified to teach anyone, she said quickly. Miss Hart tilted her head. And yet, you taught a whole auditorium how to feel. She walked away after that, leaving Lena stunned and still. Later that week, Lena received a small envelope at home. No return address. Inside was a card with only 7 words. You reminded me what music is for. It was unsigned, but she knew exactly who had sent it. And strangely, she didn't feel anger toward Kessler anymore. Pity, maybe. Or sadness. But not hate. She had climbed out of the silence he forced her into. And now she was standing in the sun. The day she packed for Vermont, she placed a photo of her grandmother, the newspaper clipping of Ruth's teaching days, and her mother's old music notebook into her suitcase. She wasn't just packing clothes. She was packing legacy. As she hugged Ruth goodbye at the train station, Ruth whispered, "Don't play for them, Lena. Play for you." Lena nodded and boarded the train. She was heading not just to Vermont, but toward the rest of her life. Vermont was colder than Lena expected. Not just the weather, but the people. The Vermont School of the Arts was stunning, tucked between forested hills, red brick buildings with tall windows, and echoing halls filled with polished floors and brilliant echoes. Students walked by with violin cases slung over their shoulders, talking about symphonies, film scores, and masterclasses in Vienna. Lena felt small. Her dorm room was neat but sterile. Her roommate, a harpist named Marla, was polite but distant, and clearly came from a different world. On the first night, Marla asked, "So which competition did you win to get in?" Lena hesitated. "I didn't. I was invited." Marla nodded slowly, her face unreadable. "Oh. That's interesting." Lena lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a mistake. The next morning began with auditions, not for acceptance, but for placement. The room was cold and silent, save for a few soft coughs and the turning of pages. 3 instructors sat behind a long table. One adjusted her glasses without ever looking up. "Name?" another asked. "Lena Morrison." "Sheet music?" "I'll be playing from memory." One of the panelists raised an eyebrow. "Improvisation?" "No," Lena said softly. "Memory." She sat at the gleaming Steinway, inhaled deeply, and began to play. She chose a personal piece. Not flashy. Not technical. Just something that came from the heart. When she finished, no one clapped. One instructor scribbled a note. Another leaned back in his chair. Finally, the third said, "You'll need to refine your dynamic control. And you're leaning too much on rubato to mask phrasing imprecision." Lena nodded, even though she wasn't sure what that meant. Okay. That was it. She left the room feeling like a shadow. Days passed. Her schedule was full: theory, technique, practice, ensemble. Her classmates discussed composers Lena had never heard of. Some had been playing since they were 4. Others had performed with orchestras. And yet, none of them moved her. She heard perfection everywhere, but not passion. Brilliance, but not beauty. Still, she worked hard. Practiced late into the night when no one else was around. She drilled finger positions and ran scales. But something was off. Her playing began to change. Not for the better. It became cleaner, yes. But also colder. Her fingers followed commands, not emotions. Her music sounded rehearsed. It scared her. Then, one Thursday, she was summoned to the director's office. Lena Morrison was a legend. A retired concert pianist known for her expressive touch and iron will. She was elegant, poised, her gray hair in a tight bun, her fingers long and graceful even in stillness. "I watched your audition," Morrison said, motioning for Lena to sit. "And I've been watching your progress since." Lena straightened her back. "I'm trying my best." "You're improving," Morrison said. "Technically, you're keeping pace." Lena felt a flicker of hope. But... and there it was. Marin leaned forward. I didn't bring you here for, technically adequate. I brought you here because I saw a video of a girl who played like she had no skin left on her soul. You played like you were bleeding truth. Now. I hear nothing. Lena blinked. I thought I had to be perfect here. Everyone else is. Marin smiled, but it wasn't mocking. Most of them are still performing for ghosts. Old teachers. Parents. The world. She stood and walked to the window. You don't need to. You've already been through fire. You came out with your voice intact. Don't lose it now. Marin turned back. You'll be performing at our midsummer recital. 2 weeks. Pick anything. No approval needed. Anything. Anything that reminds you who you are. Lena left the office shaking. That night, she pulled out her mother's notebook. Inside, she found a scribbled line near the back. You are not too much. You are just enough to break through. Her mother had written it twice. Once in cursive. Once in block letters. Lena stared at those words until her vision blurred. Then, slowly, she began to compose. Not with theory. With memory. 2 weeks later, the recital hall was full. Marin sat front row. Marla was in the third, looking more curious than cold. Lena walked on stage wearing a deep blue dress Ruth had sent by mail. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't explain her piece. She just sat, and played. The song began like rain, soft, irregular, tentative. Then it gathered, swelled, stumbled, rose again. It sounded like grief. Like courage. Like a girl remembering her voice. She ended with a single note, held longer than most would dare. Silence. Then slowly, someone stood. Then another. And another. A standing ovation. But Lena's eyes found only one person, Marin, standing still, hands clasped together. Not clapping. Smiling. Lena bowed and exhaled. She was home in her own sound again. The standing ovation from the midsummer recital echoed long after the last seat emptied. Lena sat outside the conservatory that night on a weather-worn bench, barefoot, her dress hem brushing the grass. Her fingers still tingled, not from nerves, but from honesty. That night, she hadn't performed. She had remembered. The next morning, she received an email from someone named Gideon Slate. He said he had attended the recital. Said her performance was the most spiritually unguarded thing he'd heard in a decade. Said he managed talent. Big talent. Attached was a card, Slate and Finch Talent Group. Under it, the names of world-famous classical and crossover musicians. Names Lena had only seen on album covers and concert posters. She read the message twice. Then again. Then she closed her laptop and stared out the window for a long time. Later that afternoon, she found Marin waiting for her outside the practice room. You heard? Lena nodded. He's real, Marin said. Legit. Powerful. And dangerous if you're not ready. Lena said nothing. Will you go? I don't know, Lena whispered. Marin's gaze was sharp but kind. Just don't forget this, whatever you sign, whatever stage you stand on, the moment your music stops sounding like you, walk away. 3 days later, Lena flew to New York. Slate and Finch's office was minimalist, sharp, modern. Glass walls. Abstract art. Smiles with teeth behind them. Gideon Slate met her in a tailored suit that cost more than her scholarship. He was charming, eloquent, persuasive. The kind of man who had built empires by speaking softly and making you lean in. Your music, he said, has rawness. People are starved for that. You're what they didn't know they needed. Then he handed her a folder. Inside were drafted arrangements. Polished versions of her own songs, now filled with dramatic strings, synth overlays, suggested tempo changes. He spoke of a debut EP. A campaign. Tour dates. Then he said, of course, we'll need to clean it up. Give it shape. Refine the message. Lena froze. What message? Gideon leaned forward. Emotion is great. But it needs direction. Your story is powerful. Your grief, your rise, the girl who made it from nothing, it's a perfect brand. I'm not a brand, Lena said softly. He chuckled. Everyone is. The question is whether you choose what it means, or let someone else do it for you. She left the building with the folder clutched in her arms like it might explode. That night, she walked through the city. The lights glittered. The streets pulsed. And all she wanted was silence. She ended up at the Manhattan Bridge just before midnight, wind cold on her face. She leaned over the edge, heart pounding, not from fear, but from recognition. She was about to lose her voice again. This time not to a coach or a system, but to the machine of fame. When the sun rose, she left the folder at Slate and Finch's front desk. No note. No goodbye. She caught the first train back to Vermont. Back at the conservatory, she walked straight into the practice room. No audience. No lights. Just dust and sunlight and a piano that waited like an old friend. She played for no one. And it was the truest sound she had made in weeks. She didn't need a label. She needed purpose. The next day, she returned home to Ruth. Her grandmother met her at the station with her favorite scarf and no questions. They drove home in near silence. But when they turned the corner, Lena's breath caught. Outside the community center across the street, a crowd waited. Kids. Parents. Teachers. Her old principal. Even some former classmates. A banner read, "Welcome home, Lena, you played for all of us." Lena blinked in disbelief. Ruth placed a hand on her wrist. They didn't want a concert. They wanted to say thank you. A student stepped forward shyly with a folding chair and a keyboard. Mr. Chan, the school principal, took the mic. "We watched you show the world what it means to be heard. And now, we'd just like to hear you again." Lena didn't hesitate. She stepped up. No nerves. No trembling. Just grace. She sat at the keyboard and looked into a sea of familiar faces. People who had seen her before the videos, before the Vermont halls, before the labels. She said only one thing. "I used to think music was the only place I was safe. Tonight, I want it to be safe for all of us." She played. Not her viral piece. Not her recital work. She played something new. Unfinished. Something that carried the notes of her grandmother's lullabies, the rhythms of her mother's old journal, and the heartbeat of a girl learning how to sing without screaming. And when she finished, there was no roar of applause. Just stillness. Stillness that held more than sound. Lena lingered in the doorway of her old bedroom that night, the yellow daisies from the community center now resting in a mason jar on her desk. Her mother's music journal sat open beside it, the pages curling at the edges like they were alive. The celebration had ended hours ago, but Lena's heart hadn't settled. Not yet. She sat on the floor, legs folded, the journal in her lap. She flipped through her mother's notes, sketches of melodies that never made it to song, scraps of lyrics that read more like whispers than statements. Then she found it. Tucked near the back, barely legible, was a journal entry, dated the day before her mother disappeared. "I want to believe music can heal. But I don't know if I can anymore. Maybe someone else can take what I couldn't finish. Maybe my daughter will understand." Lena felt the breath leave her lungs. Her mother hadn't just left. She had handed her a question. A plea. Lena clutched the book to her chest, and for the first time in years, she wept, not out of grief, but out of connection. She wasn't alone in her pain. She was part of something generational. Something still being written. The next afternoon, back at the community center, a new student was waiting. A boy, no older than 10, his hoodie sleeves pulled down over his hands, a backpack strapped so tight it looked like armor. His name was Zachary. He didn't speak. Barely made eye contact. The caseworker who dropped him off handed Lena a file. He's shy. Withdrawn. Doesn't talk much. Doesn't like touch. You don't have to keep him if it's too much. Lena just nodded. She didn't ask questions. She remembered what it meant to be silent. To be small and scared and unseen. So she said nothing. Instead, she sat at the piano and began to play. Not loud. Not perfect. Just soft notes, barely audible, like secrets whispered under a blanket. She didn't look at Zachary. Didn't try to make him play. She just played, for both of them. For a week, he came and sat beside her in silence. Never said a word. But each day, his body relaxed just a little more. His eyes wandered closer to the keys. Then one afternoon, he reached out and pressed a single key. Middle C. Soft. Timid. She didn't react. Just followed with an E. Then a G. A chord bloomed. His fingers twitched. Then he pressed the C again. She smiled. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Each day after, he added another note. Another breath of courage. Another inch forward. Until one day, out of nowhere, he asked the question. Was your mom like mine? Lena froze. Her fingers hovered above the keys. I don't know, she said gently. What's your mom like? He looked away. Gone. Lena nodded. Mine too. He didn't say anything else. But the silence between them felt full, not empty. Weeks passed. Zachary bloomed slowly. He began choosing which notes they started with. Began doodling little pianos in his notebook, each key a different color. He smiled, sometimes. Even hummed. Then one Friday, Lena brought her mother's journal to the piano. I found something, she said. A song my mom started, but never finished. Zachary looked at the page. The melody was only half there. Want to help me finish it? He nodded. Together, they worked, note by note, like two kids piecing together a secret language. The final version didn't soar. It wasn't flashy. But it had weight. Honesty. And when they played it together, him on melody, her on harmony, Lena felt something shift inside her. Not closure. But peace. That evening, as he packed up to leave, Zachary turned and said something that made her knees weak. She'd be proud of you, you know. Lena's voice caught. Who? He shrugged. Whoever left the song behind. Then he was gone. Lena sat at the piano long after he left. The sun had dipped low, shadows stretching across the floor. Her mother's journal sat open on the bench beside her, the finished melody glowing softly in the golden light. Maybe healing didn't come in headlines. Maybe it came like this. One note at a time. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, tucked between a stack of mail Ruth had gathered with her usual precision, one grocery flyer, a church bulletin, and the envelope that changed everything. It bore the gold-embossed crest of the Vermont School of the Arts. Lena opened it slowly, her breath catching as she read. You are invited to return as our Winter Gala keynote speaker and featured performer. Your story, your music, and your journey have left a lasting impact, not only on our students, but on the meaning of what art can be. We hope you will share that truth again. There was no signature, but Lena recognized the tone. It was Marin. She sat at the kitchen table in silence. Ruth entered the room, glanced once at the open letter, and smiled faintly. "Well," she said. "It's time." 3 weeks later, Lena stood backstage in the conservatory's grand rotunda, dressed in a black satin gown that shimmered in the light like moonlight on still water. Her hair was pulled back in a low twist. Around her neck, she wore a silver locket, her mother's. The hall hadn't changed. But Lena had. She no longer felt like an imposter in a borrowed world. She belonged. A student introduced her with quiet reverence. "She sat where we sit." But she taught us that sometimes the loudest voices start as whispers. The applause was gentle as Lena walked to the piano. She didn't bow. She didn't speak. She sat and played. The song was the one she'd written with Zachary. The one her mother had started. It moved like memory, fragile, unfinished, but filled with grace. She felt her mother in every chord. Felt Zachary's hesitant courage in every pause. Felt Ruth's faith in every slow crescendo. When the final note fell away, the applause came soft and steady. But in the second row, one man did not clap. Mr. Kessler. He sat stiffly, hands clasped, thinner than she remembered. His face was unreadable. Lena's breath caught as she stepped off stage. He stood and approached slowly, his posture heavy. "I came to listen," he said. She nodded. He took a breath, the kind of breath a man takes before saying something that costs him. "I was wrong. Not just about you. About everything. I thought control was strength. I thought silence meant obedience. But your music taught me that silence can be power, too." He looked up, eyes weary. "Do people like me deserve to change?" Lena's throat tightened. She thought of her mother. Of Ruth. Of Zachary. She said simply, "Only if they learn to listen." He nodded once. Then turned and walked away, no applause, no redemption arc. Just the long, necessary road of reckoning. That night, Lena sat in the guest dormitory, her mother's journal open in her lap. At the back was one more unfinished melody. She studied it. Felt it. Then began to hum. Outside, snow fell gently across the conservatory grounds. Weeks later, a small record label, Elmwood Records, sent her a personal letter. No glitz. No demands. Just one line, "We don't want polish. We want truth." They offered her full creative control. 10 tracks. 1 album. Hers. She didn't sign right away. She waited until she could visit the community center again. Until she could sit beside the old upright piano with the chipped key. Until Zachary returned. But he didn't. His caseworker had transferred. The center didn't know where he'd gone. It broke something in Lena. Not because he left. Because he didn't get to say goodbye. "He has your song," Ruth said softly. "That's his goodbye." So Lena named the album after him. Unfinished Things. 10 songs. 10 stories. One of them simply called Zachary's First C. The album didn't go viral. But it reached people who needed it. A widow in Colorado wrote, "Your song made me cry for the first time in 12 years. A 14-year-old boy wrote, "I didn't think someone like me could have music inside me, until now." Then one day, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a folded child's drawing. A stick figure at a piano. A smaller one beside her. At the bottom, a single line. "I found another note." She wept. Not from loss. But from love. Months later, she was invited to close the Harmony for Hope concert, a national tribute to healing through music. She stepped onto an outdoor amphitheater stage, under an open sky full of stars. Thousands of people waited. But she was looking for only one. And there he was. Zachary. Back row. Red hoodie. Knees tucked to his chest. A sign in his lap. Play the note we didn't finish. She sat at the piano. No announcement. No introduction. Just a breath. And the song. It started with the note he had played all those months ago. Middle C. Then her harmony. Then the melody that bloomed from everything they had built together. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And when it ended, the crowd didn't erupt. They exhaled. Like a story they'd been waiting to hear finally found its final page. Afterward, she found Zachary waiting behind the amphitheater. He handed her a sheet of paper. I wrote a second verse, he whispered. She smiled. Want to play it together? He nodded. But not on a stage. Lena laughed gently. I know just the place. And so they did. Not for fame. Not for applause. But because some songs aren't meant to be performed. They're meant to be shared. Quietly. Forever. Lena Morrison began as the girl too shy to be heard. The pianist who was pushed aside and forgotten. But when the world tried to silence her, she spoke through her music, and we listened. She didn't just take back her stage. She built one. For herself. For her mother. For every silent heart waiting to be heard. Sometimes the most powerful performers are the ones who first had to fight to believe they belonged. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to True Echo, where we bring you stories that awaken truth and transform silence into sound. Share this with someone who needs a reminder. You don't need permission to be powerful. You only need to be real. Now drop a comment below. What was your favorite part of Lena's story? We read every one. Until next time, keep listening to the quiet ones.